Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. The world is dangerous and enemies are everywhere. Everyone has to protect themselves. A fortress seems the safest, but isolation exposes you to more dangers than it protects you from. It cuts you off from valuable information. It makes you more conspicuous and an easy target. Better to circulate among people, find allies, and mingle. You are shielded from your enemies by the crowd. Retreat into a fortress and you lose contact with the sources of your power. You lose your ear for what is happening around you, as well as a sense of proportion. Instead of being safer, you cut yourself off from the kind of knowledge on which your life depends. Never enclose yourself so far from the streets that you cannot hear what is happening around you, including the plots against you. For people who like being alone, like myself, and just working alone, who can just find themselves get caught up in the daily grind of life and just trying to keep working and building on what they're trying to achieve. I feel like this can easily happen, and it's very important to note for people who have a tendency to be a recluse. Plenty of artists and entertainers and people in creative fields have this tendency as well. They like to be alone when they work. Musicians sometimes like to be alone when they write. I feel like when you're constantly building on your own thing, you can kind of lose contact with the people close to you, or your friends and your family in a lot of ways. And by doing this for weeks or months on end and maintaining very minimal contact with those people and even online communities, you can become very detached. You can become, as they said, detached from the streets and detached from the society around you. And it can have a positive and negative effect, but I think the negatives are very important to mention as well. I mean, you don't want to one day pop your head out under your little cave and then suddenly the people around you who have either, they've changed in some way and you've missed some really important opportunities. That's another thing, you might miss opportunities. You've missed some opportunity, or you've missed some important knowledge and information that you didn't ordinarily have because you were too busy staying within your tunnel. And it's okay to stay in the tunnel, but you have to poke your head out every now and again to keep your ear out, to see what's happening. Just be aware of your environment. It's like lurkers, like they call lurkers in communities online and like YouTube and Reddit. They call lurkers those people who don't engage, don't comment, but just watch and observe. And I feel like adopting that can be helpful, because you may not interact with everybody, but just lurking and being aware is very important, because that knowledge and information, to not cut yourself off, is pretty critical to growth and critical just to not be ignorant. Observance of the law. So Louis XIV in the 1600s had this palace called Versailles, built for him and his court, for dozens and dozens of people, with his family and people who worked and lived around him. Now, he purposely kept everyone really close to him. His bedroom was in the middle of the house, while the nobility around him was surrounded very closely by, like slowly surrounding them in like circles. And nearly every single morning, he would see in order groups of individuals and groups of people from his family, his grandchildren, princes and princesses, military officials and other people of those ranks, in descending order. So by the end of it, he had seen dozens and dozens of people. 100 people would be packed in this large room, and the day was organized. There was a plan to it, and he made sure he saw everybody and heard everybody. So he was abiding by the law simply because he was keeping his ear to his surroundings and the people around him. So it was very hard, much more difficult to plot to kill this man, because that's what, kings, queens get killed every day back then. Interpretation. Louis XIV very eagerly grasped the truth that for a king to isolate himself is gravely dangerous. In his absence, conspiracies will spring up like mushrooms after rain, animosities will crystallize into factions, and rebellion will break out before he has the time to react. Okay, now you're not a king, I'm not a king, we're not kings. I'm not talking to a king here, but I'm talking to someone of power right now. If you are someone of power, now I'm even a manager, someone who has authority over other people, whether that be a CEO of a company, or a manager of a store, whatever, somebody who has a degree of power and influence control over other people. That's when isolating yourself can become dangerous, and not figuring out and not hearing everybody, just not even listening to other people can become very untactful, very stupid, because that's how you can lose. That's how you can lose and be taken advantage of if you don't know what other people around you are saying and thinking. Even though they won't always tell you, just being able to look them in the eyes and see that is very, very valuable. Point is, if you are someone of power, someone with influence and control over people, isolate yourself with tact. Do not isolate yourself for long periods of time. And if you do, you need to stay in frequent contact in some way or another, I believe. Or risk being taken advantage of and undermined. Keys to power. Now, this idea of fortresses, there's an idea of a fortress. Kings and queens would have fortresses. You have your own fortress. Your home is your fortress, and becomes a symbol of power and isolation. And it's designed to defend you, like a house is designed to defend us from weather and animals and other strangers, other predators. It can also act in cutting you off and cutting off your flexibility. And they're extremely vulnerable to the plague and contagious diseases. And it can actually create more problems than it serves. That is what Machiavelli says. That's where this idea comes from. Now, everybody knows, humans we are social creatures by nature, and power depends on social interaction. So to make yourself powerful, you must place yourself at the center of things, like Louis XIV did. All activity should revolve around you, and you should be aware of everything happening on the street and of anyone who might be hatching plots against you. Now, the mistake in when people feel threatened and are threatened by some type of danger, they retreat closer to the people they're close to and trust, their close ranks and circles, to find some type of security. But in doing so, they come to rely on even a smaller, more biased information and knowledge. And you can lose perspective from the events around you. In moments of uncertainty and danger, you need to fight this desire to turn inward. Instead, make yourself more accessible. Seek out old allies and make new ones. Force yourself into more and more different circles. This has been a trick of powerful people for centuries. Never imagine yourself so elevated that you can afford to cut yourself off from even the lowest echelons. By retreating to a fortress, you make yourself an easy target for your plotting subjects who view your isolation as an insult and a reason for rebellion. This reminds me of artists, musicians, I love music, who will take time and really not be on any social media, remove themselves from that, and go work. And they won't stay in contact with their fans. You will rarely hear about them or see them. Frank Ocean is a example of this. Frank Ocean has been working on an album for a while, and he is not on any social media. And all we've heard is little rumors on when this album is going to drop. All he has is a website and a blog. So reading these music communities, you're reading the anger and the impatience by these fans, because they don't know, they're uncertain. Childish Gambino, actor and artist, who rarely stays on social media as well. He actually deletes all these tweets when he's on Twitter as soon as he does something or asks a question for some reason. He's also pretty quiet as well, and this can not stay in contact with the people, the lower echelons, your fans, the people who trust and look up to you. I think can give you more harm than do you good. In the 1500s, one of the members of the Medici family commissioned a painter, Jacopo Pontormo, to paint one of these churches, one of these chapels. Now, Pontormo, you have to understand his perspective. His perspective was he wanted this painting to create his legacy. He wanted it to be legendary. He wanted to outdo Michelangelo himself, so he had very, very high expectations of himself. Now, Jacopo, he sealed himself off. People tried to get in to the church, and he sealed it even further. Now, he filled the ceiling. Imagine Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, On the top of a middle wall, he painted Jesus Christ raising the dead on Judgment Day. This is what I'm reading. He painted all this, and he worked on this for 11 years of his life, over a decade, and he rarely left it. And he developed some type of phobia for human contact because he was afraid his ideas would be stolen, hence the reason he closed himself off so much. And he died before any of this was even finished. Now, a great writer, a Renaissance writer, Vasari, a friend of Pontormo, left a description of what all this looked like after he died. And he noted there was a complete lack of proportion in the paintings, scenes bumped up against each other, figures in one story being juxtaposed with those in another. Juxtaposed means compare and contrast. And so it's like he'd been completely obsessed with the detail but had lost any sense of overall composition. And I'll explain to you why this is important. Now, these paintings were visual equivalents of the effects of isolation on the human mind, a loss of proportion, an obsession with detail combined with an inability to see the larger picture, a kind of extravagant ugliness that no longer communicates. Clearly, isolation is as deadly for the creative arts as for the social arts. Artists who hold themselves up in a fortress lose a sense of proportion, their work communicating only to their circle. Such art remains cornered and powerless. And this reminds me of Kid Cudi's latest album, an album called Speeding Bullet to Heaven. And this work is nothing like his previous work. He's taken a very, very different turn to what he's previously done. And as a result, you look online, you see a majority of people are shitting on this album. They're shitting on it. It just sounds very strange and weird, and the samples here and the production and his instrumentation is just either low quality or weird, and just the whole combination of it didn't resonate with people. And for the meantime, you could probably attribute to this to Cudi really only communicating with his inner circle. And an example of how this is true is when Kid Cudi is known for blocking a lot of people on social media, especially Twitter, and I've seen many people who have criticized in some type of way, whether they be constructive or not, about some of his music, and Kid Cudi will block this person. So it's like he doesn't want to hear any type of point of view that's not towards what he's doing, even if it's constructive. Even if the masses don't agree, it's like he doesn't want to hear it. So that's where isolation can be dangerous in the real life, in artist's creative field, if you are in it. You need to be permeable, able to float in and out of different circles and mix with different types. That kind of mobility in social contact will protect you from plotters who will be unable to keep secrets from you, and from your enemies who will be unable to isolate you from your allies. Always on the move, you mix and mingle in rooms of the palace, never sitting or settling in one place. No hunter can fix his aim on such a swift, moving creature. Reversal. It is hardly ever right and propitious to choose isolation. Without keeping an ear on what is happening in the streets, you will be unable to protect yourself. About the only thing that constant human contact cannot facilitate is thought. The weight of society's pressure to conform and the lack of distance from other people can make it impossible to think clearly about what is going on around you. As a temporary recourse, then isolation can help you gain perspective. An example of this is Machiavelli could write The Prince only once he found himself in exile and isolated on a farm far from political intrigues of Florence. So temporarily, isolation can be amazing. You can go to Hawaii and create My Dark Beautiful Twisted Fantasy like Kanye West did. You can go and temporarily isolate yourself to create masterpieces. But doing it for long term, that's when it can be more dangerous. Because the world is very, very noisy, and isolation is important to keep your sanity. I believe that to my heart and soul. Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous.